They call the airplane as a Vimana. So that name is still used for planes.
More than 3,000 years before modern science, ancient Sanskrit texts described flying machines that sound impossible even today. Machines that could travel across kingdoms, disappear into the clouds, change direction at will, and even journey beyond the Earth's atmosphere. Some accounts even describe them as palaces in the sky, and enough space for entire royal families to travel in the air. For centuries, historians believed these descriptions were simply mythology, symbolism, or poetic imagination. But in 2025, powerful AI systems like Grok analyze these manuscripts the same way they analyze engineering documents. And instead of stories, it found detailed explanations of how these flying machines were supposed to fly, how they were controlled, what they were made from. Then it discovered that the same kinds of descriptions appeared in several ancient texts written centuries apart. So, was this simply an extraordinary coincidence? Or had everyone been reading these ancient Sanskrit texts the wrong way? Let's find out. Hidden in the oldest scriptures. Right now, nearly 4,200 religions are being practiced around the world. And among all of them, Hinduism is generally considered the oldest major religion still in practice. Its roots began around the Indus Valley and stretch back more than 5,000 years. But what makes Hinduism truly fascinating isn't just its age, it's the ancient books it left behind. Some of those books are considered to be the oldest and most mysterious texts ever preserved by human civilization. And within those texts, we find stories that almost sound like science fiction, until the details become too specific to ignore. The earliest references appear in the Rig Veda, one of the oldest religious books ever written, dating to around 1500 to 1200 BCE, more than 3,000 years ago. In several hymns, we find descriptions of unusual flying vehicles used by divine beings. One of the best-known examples appears in Mandala 1, Hymn 116, where the twin gods, Ashvins, rescue a prince named Bhuju in what is described as a three-wheeled flying vehicle that moves through the sky without touching the ground. Another hymn describes shining heavenly vehicles compared to birds rising into the sky. The language is still poetic, and many scholars see these as symbolic stories. But one thing is clear: the idea of flying machines was already part of these ancient texts. Then, around 1,000 years later, in the Ramayana, composed between the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, the descriptions become much more detailed. Here we meet the famous Pushpaka Vimana, said to have been built by Vishvakarma, the divine architect, for Brahma, the creator god. It was later given to Kubera, the god of wealth, before being seized by Ravana, the powerful king of Lanka, and finally used by Rama after Ravana's defeat. The Ramayana describes it as a flying palace with golden floors. It could travel wherever its rider wished, change speed and direction freely, and even expand or shrink, so there was always enough room for every passenger. Now, after the Rig Veda and the Ramayana, perhaps the most extraordinary descriptions appear in the Mahabharata, an epic compiled between 400 BCE and 400 CE. Because here, these mysterious flying vehicles are no longer used just for travel. They are used in war. The text describes King Salva attacking the city of Dwaraka in a flying craft called Sobha, which could disappear from sight, reappear among the clouds, flash blinding light, and launch attacks from the sky without warning. Other passages describe fierce aerial battles and powerful weapons that set entire armies on fire, filling the battlefield with smoke, flames, and destruction. Now, Notice what's happening here. The same idea appears again and again across texts written centuries apart, first as divine sky vehicles, then as flying vehicles carrying people, and finally as machines used in war. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. After analyzing all of these ancient sources, Grok AI concluded that the strangest text was not the Rig Veda, not the Ramayana, and not even the Mahabharata. Instead, one lesser-known manuscript stood apart from all the rest, because, unlike the famous epics, it doesn't read like mythology. It reads like someone was trying to explain how these flying machines were actually built and operated. The Forbidden Manual. This mysterious manuscript was called the Vimanas Shastra, which surprisingly translates to the science of aeronautics. Instead of prayers or mythology, the text contains nearly 3,000 Sanskrit verses spread across 8 chapters. Each chapter is filled with technical descriptions, measurements, materials, flight procedures, and detailed instructions. It even classifies different types of aircraft. One called the Shakuna Vimana was designed like a bird with wing-like structures. Another, the Rukma Vimana, is described as a large circular craft with multiple levels. But the aircraft themselves are only part of the story. The manuscript even explains what pilots should wear before flying, what they should eat during different seasons, and describes 32 special techniques they had to master before they were trusted to fly one of these machines. Then it goes even deeper. It lists 16 different metals for building the aircraft. Whether those ideas make scientific sense is another question entirely. But the language itself sounds far closer to an engineering manual than a religious scripture. But as surprising as the contents of this manuscript are, its origin is even more unbelievable. According to Pandit Anakal Subbaraya Shastri, a mystic from Karnataka, India, the text wasn't his own work. Between 1904 and 1918, he claimed he received it through psychic channeling. In simple words, he believed an ancient sage was mentally transmitting the knowledge to him rather than him writing it from his own imagination. That sage was Maharishi Bharadvaja, one of the legendary 7 great sages of ancient India. As Shastri dictated the verses, Sanskrit scholar G. Venkatachala Sharma carefully wrote them down, eventually filling 23 notebooks. Now here's the biggest problem. Because of this extraordinary origin, mainstream historians have never accepted the manuscript as an authentic ancient text. No older copy has ever been discovered, and there is no known reference to the Vimanas Shastra anywhere before the 20th century. But despite all that, the manuscript refused to disappear. Its detailed technical language made it one of the most debated texts connected to ancient Indian aviation, and eventually, it caught the attention of experts outside the world of history. And what they found inside this mysterious text changed the discussion completely. The investigation. In 1974, the mystery took a completely different turn. A team of 5 aerospace and mechanical engineering researchers at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore decided to examine the Vimanas Shastra using modern engineering. Their study, titled A Critical Study of the Work Vimanas Shastra, wasn't an attempt to prove the manuscript right or wrong. They simply wanted to answer one question: could these machines actually fly, using the exact dimensions and designs described in the text? The results were clear. The aircraft, as described, would not fly. The Shakuna Vimana, designed like a bird, produced far too much air resistance to generate enough lift. Other designs relied on heavy internal engines and unusual airflow systems that violated basic aerodynamic principles. According to the engineers, none of the 4 major Vimana designs could remain stable in the air using conventional physics. For most people, that should have ended the story. But it didn't. Because while the engineers rejected the aircraft themselves, they found something else they couldn't easily explain. The manuscript describes 17 different structural materials called lohas, with names like Rajaloha, Trinetra Loha, and Kundadara. It even gives detailed recipes for producing them, combining specific minerals, acids, and organic compounds at carefully controlled temperatures. According to the text, these materials were extremely strong, resisted corrosion, and absorbed heat during flight. Yet, when researchers compared those formulas with modern metallurgical knowledge, they found no exact matches. That didn't prove the materials ever existed, but it did raise a difficult question. If the aircraft designs made no engineering sense, then why were the materials described with such unusual technical detail? That question puzzled scientists, historians, and Sanskrit scholars for decades. Then, in late 2025, powerful AI systems like Grok were used to examine these ancient texts in a completely new way. Now, instead of asking whether the stories were true, the AI searched for patterns, technical language, and hidden connections. And what it found changed the entire investigation. What Grok found. The first thing that caught the AI's attention was the propulsion system, liquid metals, electricity, and the surrounding atmosphere. It even mentions electrical devices, chemical batteries, and a rotating core filled with mercury. Grok found that these descriptions don't match any aircraft that has ever been built. But they do show similarities to a few experimental propulsion ideas that modern scientists have explored. That doesn't prove the ancient text was describing the same technology. But it was unusual enough for the AI to flag it as more than just a random coincidence. The second surprise was the navigation system. Instead of simply telling the pilot where to go, the manuscript describes using mirrors and other instruments to monitor the sun, the stars, changing atmospheric conditions, and even the Earth's magnetic field. According to Grok, the language reads less like a magical vehicle and more like someone trying to describe an actual navigation system using the scientific understanding available to them. But the biggest surprise came from something much simpler. The manuscript doesn't claim these flying machines could go anywhere or do anything. Instead, it gives them limits. It warns that some aircraft become unstable above certain altitudes. Others perform differently during storms or the monsoon season. It even says pilots should change their clothing, diet, and some operating materials depending on the time of year. That might sound like a small detail. But to an AI, it's one of the most important clues in the entire manuscript. Magical objects don't usually come with operating restrictions. Real machines do, and whether those machines ever existed or not, Grok concluded that the text follows a surprisingly consistent pattern of engineering thinking. Even then, one major problem remained. If these flying machines were ever real, why has archaeology never found a single trace of them? The evidence problem. From the very beginning, one question has followed this entire mystery. If ancient India really possessed flying machines, where is the evidence? Where are the engines, the broken parts, the workshops where these machines were built? After all, archaeology has uncovered everything from ancient temples and weapons to coins and pottery. So why hasn't it found a single Vimana? At first, that sounds like the strongest argument against the entire story. But one respected Sanskrit scholar believed researchers were asking the wrong question. His name was Dr. V. Rahavan, head of the Sanskrit department at the University of Madras and a recipient of the Padma Bhushan, one of India's highest civilian honors. He wasn't trying to prove that Vimanas were real. Instead, he argued that archaeologists might be searching for the wrong kind of evidence. In modern engineering, These are called composite materials, where different ingredients are combined to create something lighter and stronger than a single material alone. The problem is, organic materials rarely survive for thousands of years. And India's hot climate, heavy monsoon rains, and constantly changing soil conditions speed up that process even more. Over centuries, the original structure can disappear almost completely, leaving little or nothing that can still be recognized. What's interesting is that modern aircraft are moving in a surprisingly similar direction. Airplanes like the Boeing 787 Dreamliner and Airbus A350 are now built using more than 50% composite materials because they're lighter, stronger, and better at handling extreme conditions than many traditional metals. Of course, none of this proves the Vimanas ever existed. It simply means the absence of physical evidence doesn't end the mystery as neatly as it first appears. But there was one detail the manuscript kept returning to. A single substance mentioned over and over again, not as decoration or symbolism, but as the heart of the entire propulsion system. Mercury. The Mercury mystery. According to the Vaimanika Shastra, one of the aircraft's main propulsion systems was built around a sealed chamber filled with mercury. The text says the mercury was first heated, then made to spin rapidly inside a circular container, creating a powerful force that allowed the craft to rise and move through the air. At first, that sounds impossible, but what caught researchers' attention wasn't the claim that it could fly. It was the fact that the manuscript chose mercury in the first place. Mercury is unlike almost any other metal on Earth. It stays liquid at room temperature, conducts electricity extremely well, and is nearly 14 times heavier than water. That combination makes it one of the most unusual elements found in nature. Today, scientists know that spinning liquid metals like mercury inside magnetic fields can produce real electromagnetic effects. This is part of a recognized field of physics called magnetohydrodynamics, where electricity and magnetic fields interact with conductive liquids. Similar ideas have been explored in advanced engineering, from cooling systems in nuclear reactors to experimental propulsion research. Even NASA tested a mercury ion engine during its SERT-1 mission in 1964 because mercury's heavy atoms made it useful for that kind of technology. But this is where modern science parts ways with the manuscript. No experiment has ever shown that spinning mercury can generate enough force to lift an aircraft or overcome gravity. According to everything we currently know about physics, that simply shouldn't happen. Yet the question remains, why did the manuscript focus so heavily on mercury? Why choose the one naturally occurring metal that's both a liquid and an excellent conductor of electricity? Grok didn't claim the manuscript had discovered a lost propulsion system. But it did point out something difficult to ignore. Whoever wrote these descriptions seemed to understand that if you wanted to combine electricity and an extremely dense material, mercury was the obvious choice. Whether that was remarkable scientific insight or an extraordinary coincidence, no one can say for certain. Because the strangest part of the story wasn't the engine itself. It was where these mysterious flying machines were said to travel. Beyond the sky. Perhaps the most surprising passages inside these ancient Sanskrit texts aren't about flying across kingdoms at all. They're about flying beyond the sky. In several parts of the Mahabharata, especially in the Vanaparva and Dronaparva, travelers describe something unusual happening as their journey continues upward. The bright blue sky slowly turns dark until it becomes almost black. The stars appear clearer and brighter than before. And then comes one detail that caught Grok AI's attention more than any other. Looking down from above, the travelers describe the Earth as appearing like a great round sphere, suspended below them. Mainstream scholars still interpret these passages as poetic descriptions of celestial journeys, and that remains the accepted view. But Grok noticed something unusual. In these specific passages, the language becomes far less symbolic and far more observational. Instead of focusing on gods, miracles, or divine powers, the text begins describing changing physical conditions, almost like someone is recording what they see during a journey. Of course, none of this proves that ancient Indians traveled into space, but there is a big problem. The Earth's rotation wasn't explained by the Indian astronomer Aryabhata until 499 CE. So if these texts were compiled centuries earlier, how did they end up describing observations that sound so surprisingly accurate? Perhaps it was extraordinary imagination. Perhaps it was knowledge that has been misunderstood over time. Or perhaps it's something else entirely. What we do know is that ancient India was already capable of remarkable scientific achievements. It gave the world the decimal number system, the concept of zero, advanced astronomy, and one of history's most sophisticated systems of grammar. So discovering unexpected technical ideas inside its oldest manuscripts isn't nearly as impossible as it may first seem. Today, thousands of Sanskrit manuscripts remain untranslated, and many have never been studied with modern AI tools. For the first time, researchers can compare enormous collections of ancient texts in ways that would have taken human scholars generations. So, in the end, what do you think? Were the Vimanas nothing more than brilliant mythology? Or could they preserve fragments of knowledge that history has yet to fully understand? Let me know your thoughts about this in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you want more incredible mysteries, discoveries, and true stories like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.